So this shiur comes in continuation to the previous shiur, which, as you may have noticed, was a bit on the shorter end, a bit gechapt. I heard afterwards from a number of the younger lights that they were still taking an interest in the topic, and they commented a bit. So I figured might as well have a continuation. And between the two, hopefully we'll have Dovid Hashalem. Now, even though in every shiur I try to ensure that there's a dvar chiddush in the shiur, it doesn't always have to be mindsa chiddush, but it could be the makaidas or the way the makaidas are put together. But in this shiur, I want to say b'mizak the bissel eigene here in Yeridea 7 Kuf Yates. The reason being that usually I try to look and find and see if things are addressed. In this case, I couldn't seem to find something that addressed the issues to my satisfaction. So we'll get to hear what that sounds like. We'll see if it works or not. Of course, in this case, we're talking about the Shulchan Aruch. You have the pages in front of you. So one of the younger light in this Kolel, we can say one of the Chashuva younger light, who's also involved a little bit in Hira. So he commented to me that Mamish, b'yamim elu, just recently he got a question that's negeh to these halachas. There's a shliach who's dealing with someone who's supposed to be observing kashrus, but the shliach knows they bought some chametz before Pesach, and when the shliach commented, mentioned something about, well, you have to sell it, you have to sell the chametz for Pesach, he got a comment. It seemed like the person didn't really understand, appreciate the point, the significance. Right? Some people they look at it as a joke. So, l'chayr, that means this person is chashud, l'gabe this inyan. And now this person wants to bring the food, the same food, similar food to the Chabad house for an event after Pesach. And the shliach suspects that this could be chametz she'avar olva Pesach without a mechira, but not 100%. Maybe they went and bought the same thing again, etc. Now, if you're assuming that they're a chashud, so then you have separate halachas in Shulchan Aruch, Nechas Pesach. If you know that a yid has, Shulchan Aruch calls it a mummer, you know that a yid has chametz she'avar olva Pesach, how long do you have to wait until you assume that it's been this turnover? So what's the din? Obviously, the instinct is to try to help the shliach, make things less complicated for them, So I believe already that younger man started commenting to me that is there truly no way, no place to say that even if I'm not convinced that they're keeping the halachas, but if they come to me and they tell me, look, Rabbi, for you, I understand I'm keeping the halachas properly in this context, is there no room and logic to say that we should take that into account? So I said in response that in continuation to the previous shiur was about trusting women that have somewhat of a spotty track record when it comes to mitzvahs and avedas, tara. So I'm still thinking about this question myself, right? Because one of the main cases I mentioned was the husband's about tshuva, the wife is not. Previously they lived without taras hamishpacha, now the husband wants to make a change. She's not on board with observing halacha, but the question would be, maybe she'll agree to do it for his sake. Now, is that trustworthy or not? Right? Chashut. Now, Meil in the cases that we quoted from Shalos at Shuvas, from the Tzemach Tzedek, where the woman was machshel her husband, it was a normal from context, and the woman was machshel. So she's chashud to be machshel other people. And even then, in that case, the Tzemach Tzedek is relatively easy. The poskim are relatively easy. You can do tshuva, whatever tshuva is. Unlike sheichet or whatever, we give her a harder time. But here in this case, it's not fair to say about tshuva. She wasn't machshel her husband. They were on the same page. They were living irreligiously together. So why does that make us automatically assume that, oh no, she's going to be machshel him? Is there no value to previous acquaintance? They know each other. Why don't we let him decide on his own whether he feels like he can trust her or not? Right? B'chalal, you could say, sometimes you have people with black hats, and lav dafka you feel so comfortable actually trusting them and relying on them, particularly in hashkacha and things like that. You have a feeling, and vice versa, you could have someone who's not religious, but you have a feeling that this person is honest and they're straightforward and they'll listen to what you tell them. If they need to tell you the truth, they'll tell you the truth. So if this idea had any validity, that would be very helpful. But on the other hand, from the general hemshech of Siman Kufya test, doesn't seem like there's such a possibility for them to just come and tell us that it's fine, and then we'll just say, okay, then be convinced. After our conversation, I found that there is a discussion on this type of question as to whether there's room for personal trust. So there is a discussion like this in Paiskim in recent years, and we'll hopefully the plan is to get back to it at the end, at least Bekitzer. But before we get to that, I was struck by the Etzem topic, this Yisoid. What's the Yisoid over here? And the more I thought about it, and the more I searched to see if anyone talks about it, and I couldn't find, I got more and more shver. So you read the sentence in Sif Aleph, HaChashad lecho dvarim ha'asurim ein lismach ala behem, im nesareach imoi, lo yoichal mishalem dvarim shu chashad aleim. So one way of reading it, what would seem like a reasonable way of reading it and understanding the idea would be that once upon a time there weren't products and there weren't brands. You went into a house, you found the milk. And back then, and to some extent, to a great extent even today, it's not so appropriate to start asking people, what is this, where's it from? It's rude. And if you ask, maybe they'll just be insulted and say, why, you don't trust me, etc. Or maybe you walk into the house and the person isn't even there. There's no one to ask b'chal, you just see the milk, for example. So, even though every yid has a cheskas kashrus, which for pashtus means that you don't even have to ask, right? Mash'enkin by a nida you have to ask, dafka when there's already a cheskas tuma, then she has to say tavalti. But otherwise cheskas kashrus means you don't have to ask. So this chashud doesn't have a cheskas kashrus. So maybe we could just read the Shulchan Aruch as meaning that bistama, if you don't have any additional information, all you know is that it's this guy, it's his stuff, ein lismach. But once we get to the question of ne'amanus means trusting, is he reliable? L'chayr, that's a slightly different question. That's not the same din, that's not the same question. L'chayr, it's not so pashat that someone who's not makpid, particular on something for himself, why are we making the leap and automatically assuming, therefore the person's a serial liar. Whenever the topic comes up, they're going to lie about it. What's the connection? Or at least there's the correlation. There might be somewhat of a connection, but the correlation's so strong. Let's take Balabatish examples. Some people are particular to buy the more expensive version of a product, and other people are not. So if I'm the one who's makbid, my friend is not, and I go to him and I say, could you please take care of this for me? Go and get but please make sure it's the more expensive version of the product. I should automatically assume that now, if this is not important to him, then he's automatically going to lie to me about it. It doesn't seem like such a reasonable, straightforward assumption to make. You have many examples. You look packaging, right? It's gluten-free, non-GMO, sugar-free, all the different buzzwords you'll find on the packaging. Right? Some packaging has it, some doesn't. So if I personally don't care, I don't look for sugar-free, I don't have a problem with sugar. My friend tells me, sugar-free is very important to me, I don't want to have sugar for my health. That means that I'm going to start lying to them now and give them something they don't want? Some people might do that, but why is that an assumption? If you go with the Havana and the Shulchan Aruch that I suggested, so it makes a lot of sense. If you walk into someone's house and they're stam serving food, you shouldn't assume that everything is sugar-free. Why would you assume that? This person doesn't observe sugar-free. But if you go over and you explain the situation, please take into account that I care. We should take everyone out of their chazaka, of their namanus, as reasonable, trustworthy people that care about their friends. It's possible to imagine certain scenarios in which if you don't care, you think it's nonsense, so then you don't take your friend seriously. Right? The more he thinks it's nonsense, the more he thinks it's literally just ridiculous. What are you talking about? Okay. But again, how strong is this correlation? And maybe sometimes it very well be the opposite. You might think that for me, I need to get the more expensive version. For you, you don't need the expensive. It can go either way. That should be its own discussion. And maybe we should take people's personalities, etc., into account and their attitude towards this specific problem. Why are we just taking away everyone's nemanas and trustworthiness like that without an individual discussion or debate? If he's choshed to sell limkar dvarim, like it says in Sif Beis, he's just selling non-kosher things, bistam. Okay, so you see this guy's already out there being machshel other people that he knows probably wouldn't want to be eating what he's giving them. And even that guy you're still allowed to eat in his house. Why? Because we're not looking at the person. The person who's willing to sell not kosher things, why would he have any issue with feeding you directly? Why would that be different? So we're not looking at the person, we're looking at the place. The store is a place where the things tend to be not kosher. His house tends to be a place where the things are kosher. So that's why it's fine. And that's the person who we at least have evidence that he's machshel people. But the person who's just eating not kosher himself, and he's not in the field of stores and selling and sales, where's the evidence about how he treats other people? And why not the opposite? Maybe he doesn't care about himself. He's willing to be machshel himself. Other people, he doesn't want to mess with their values. Again, if you're in his house and it's bistam, so obviously you should assume that the food is not kosher. But if you have reason to assume that he would go out of his way and give you what you want, what you need, why not? Now, B'emes, I found that a number of svarim that touch on questions like this in a more lumdish oifen. Right? Because you actually have additional isurim. There's additional isurim of midvar sheker terchak. Lying is an aveda. Lifnei iver is an aveda. And we said in Sif Daled, hachashud l'davar echad, eini chashud l'dvarim acherim. So, the guy doesn't eat kosher. Why are we accusing him of being over on midvar sheker terchak and lifnei iver? Right, more lumdish version of that. So, Moshe, I saw people mitzayin to the Gadol. Gadol is the Gadol of Minsk. Biruchim Perelman, the Rav in Minsk, lived around the time of the Marash, the Rashab. Tavshim Amzayin, Machan Yerushalayim printed Gadol HaShalim with a chelik beis, with additional tshuvas and stuff. So in Siman Yotes is a tshuva, Be'inyan Lefnei Iver, Be'isur D'Rabbanan. And he's having a pilpul, being mefalpul with another Litvish Rav. He starts off, he says, your question is, if you're machshel chaveda be'isur D'Rabbanan, were you now over on Lifnei Iver Deiraisa or not? L'chayra, Lifnei Iver Deiraisa, standard Lifnei Iver is, you give the guy an eitzah she'eino higanis. You end up causing him to do something he wouldn't otherwise have wanted to do. No, so Isur D'Rabbanan is also eitzah she'eino higanis. So it should also be Lifnei Iver Deiraisa. So every time you're machshel Isur D'Rabbanan, you're Ratzim Iver Deiraisa. That's what the other Rav wanted to say. So he discusses that, then he says later on, B'emes, literally Pashut, the Einei Kain. No, Lifnei Iver of Isur D'Rabbanan is also D'Rabbanan. There's different ayahs. One of his ayahs is, Kaim alon achashad lachal Isur D'Rabbanan, ein seimchen olav, v'einei nemen lahachal acherim. Now if you say Lifnei Iver is Deiraisa, achashad alakal, ein chashad alachamor, so Ebazai is only chashad to not eat kosher, but he's not nechshad to be machshel people and be over Lifnei Iver Deiraisa. We're talking about an Isur D'Rabbanan. To be meichel a person Isur D'Rabbanan, so he would eat the Isur D'Rabbanan, but he wouldn't be machshel someone Isur D'Rabbanan because he knows that's really Lifnei Iver Deiraisa. He's mitzayin to the Teres Habayis or the Rashba, the Gemara and B'chayres, that you're not allowed to buy Yamach Mechag. I assume you may have seen it in the Beis Yosef, etc. Yayin, Murias, Chalav, etc. Certain products in Syria. So the Ra'ah in the Bedek Habayis there has a fakarter take. He says you have someone who's chashid lechol, ve'enei chashid lahachol. You have the taka, according to the Ra'ah, there is a zamitzias. It's taka chashid that he eats treif. He wouldn't stam give other people treif until you prove that he does. The Rashba wrote lepech, like we have in our Shulchan Aruch, that there's a musig of someone who sells to other people, but he himself doesn't. So in his house you can trust him, but not the opposite. So in the Mishmeres Habayis of the Rashba, where the Rashba is responding to the Bedek Habayis, responding to the Teres Habayis, so he says, why would you assume that he doesn't care about himself, but he cares more about his friend? That's the Rashba's retort to his response. Zok the Gadol, Lahanal, according to what I said, Ein zotei maklal. The chashid l'Rabbanan and a chashid l'Daraisa. He eats Yisurim d'Rabbanan, but he doesn't want to be machshel people and be over l'fnei Daraisa. So we can schlag up the Rashba's argument. There's also a Tashbetz. The Tashbetz in Chel Gimel, Sivan Pei Gimel, says that the Rivash Taka wanted to rely on Maisa on the Ra'ah. In that time, in that period with Anusim, they started having lots of these types of questions. So the Rivash wanted to rely on the Ra'ah and say, even if he's a person that's not so from, but he wouldn't be machshel other people. And the Tashbetz said, no, the Ra'ah Svaras, Eina Miskabelas, you can only go the other way. You can be machshel other people, but be machshel on yourself, but not the reverse. And he writes at the beginning that V'hoida L'dvara, the Rivash was Moida. And again, La'anao, Ma'kor L'rash, Frek D'Argano. So from Rabbi is Muchrach, that L'fnei Iver, V'izid Rabban, is only Midrabbanan. Then that discussion itself is its own discussion in Achreidim. We're not going to get into that. But what do we see from here? Number one, we see he wasn't automatically persuaded by the Rashba, the Tashbetz's logic. It's not given to him that if you machshel yourself, you'll for sure be machshel others. And for that reason, he decided that Medarf create a nafkamina that in Lefnei Iver. How does Lefnei Iver work? Oh, Medarf Muslim Zagan, Lefnei Iver works this way, not that way, which l'chayr is a little shver that you have to stick this type of stuff, this type of logic into the cheshbon of the dinim. Pushtate. Okay. Al derech so we could discuss the sheker, the lying, right? So the assumption is there's an element of lying here. So in that conversation that I mentioned earlier, so when we were speaking about this point, why are we assuming that they're lying? So we touched on this. I said, does that mean that the underlying assumption is that people be'etzem are lying all the time? I mentioned, it's popular to quote the studies. Studies show that the average person lies this number of times per day. You may have seen that quote here and there. And lavdaf, when we say that, we don't mean lavdafke that they're pathological liars. It just means out of comfort. Because there are many scenarios in which it's not pleasant to say the truth or to correct people or whatever it is. So for the reasons like that, or they feel like the truth isn't so relevant, why get bogged down in the details? So it's just a method for smoothing daily interactions. So to get rid of those bumps where you start nitpicking over the truth and not truth. Lamer Zagan, that's the case. So Ebazai, is that the idea here? And we can give a lamdish sounding chakira. Bechlal, is every person b'cheska shakrin until we prove that he's reliable? Or is every person fakir, everyone's b'cheskas reliable until we prove he's a shakrin? So maybe the assumption here, the underlying assumption here is that even a frumiyad would be a liar. But because it's clear to us, or upon him he's b'cheskas, that he's afraid of Avedis, he doesn't want to be machshel other people. So for this reason, Dafka will say that he's not lying, therefore he's Naman. But the second we see that he doesn't care about the Aveda, even though he was never proven to be a liar, we only saw that he's not doesn't care about the Aveda, maybe that would be the vart that he returns to the chazaka, he returns to the underlying chazaka, which is that everyone's a liar, nobody minds lying. So in recent years, I saw a Torah Dika Kaivetz from recent years called Pa'olam HaTorah Gillian Yutes, came out in Tafshinai Hey. There's an article there from Arovs, his name is Rabbi Yaakov Landau, a Chassidish Arav, other Chassidish Kreisen in Beersheva. The article is about Hanoyeg Heter B'Meichel Inachshav Kechashid L'Misha Noyeg Isser. If I hold that this is mutter and you hold that this is aser, am I a chashid l'gabe you that I don't care that you hold that it's aser, I'm going to feed it to you. And specifically, what's he talking about? It's the Shemitah. So he says, you have the Shemitah organizations of certain gormim, certain elements, who are known to be mekel, and he kind of bring himself to say the words heter mechira. So they're mekel and haramas hamechira. Fine. So now they went ahead, these same people went ahead, and they also made an oitzer based. Oitzer based works differently. It's supposed to not go through Goyim. So do they have an emanus to us, people who don't believe in Aramas HaMechira, and we would use Eitzer Beistin, but it's their Eitzer Beistin. So can I trust them now that they're doing Eitzer Beistin correctly? So he has 25 pages on this. And beyond that specific example, it is a chashuva question that could be relevant in various situations. Look also here in Shulchan Aruch in Siv Zayin. B'akapanim l'inyanenu, somewhere in the middle he writes that it's Ken Zayin, that if a person's mekel, according to the Paiskim that say to be mekel, so we wouldn't call him a chashud, but it's Ken Zayin that if Ne'emanus is based on a cheskas kashrus, here the cheskas kashrus shouldn't help. Because for him, if he was machshel you, he wouldn't feel like he was over and lifnei iver, because to him it's mutter. So he doesn't feel like he's being over and lifnei iver. So if there's no avera at risk here, at stake here, then he doesn't have ne'emanus. And we can't say that he has a cheskas kashrus not to lie, because avada, the cheskas kashrus won't help, in his opinion, to say that he's not lying. What's the raya? You have an avodah zara, and then Beis Yosef, Yeridayas, and Kufyates. With these products, the chalav, the gvina, Beis Yosef says in Kufyates that we see, right, so when it says chasha afilu b'derabban, what's the marker? Because the Gemara mentions examples of chalav and gvina. Chalav and gvina are yisunim derabbanan. Va'afilu achi, ilav de'iyu lo yachal yisuna, hava asrinan lasareach atzloi. Right, so you need him to dafka not eat it. Otherwise, right? We see this from the chashud al-kal, chashud al-chomer. And there's an issue shaka deraisa, that's goes with so why shouldn't it be nema? So from here, he wants to prove that the Isser l'shaker is clearly kal yoiser be'enei stamene adam. People don't think of lying as such a serious crime. Just speech. So v'leka b'zeh cheskas kashrus. So he wants to say that even someone who l'shita sois psakim and he's not being machshel anyone, but he doesn't have a cheskas, no avera at stake, so then he's gonna not gonna want to lie. But if l'shita sois there's no avera, then he can. So from here it sounds like dafka when they'll get caught. When it's going to come out right away and they'll be exposed, they'll be caught. Then they don't lie. But otherwise, Chazal is acknowledging that people lie. That's what he wants to argue. So he essentially has taken a side in this question. He assumes that everyone's stam lying and everyone has a cheskas shakra, even if the guy was never suspected of doing any isser. And you can look at the end of his article where he talks about his maskanas that if the person holds that the heter mechira is mamish the way to go, and those who say otherwise, they're wrong, that's terrible. And if he agrees that the people that are machmir, it's taka chumra, royla achmir, so then, even then, in his opinion, you still probably shouldn't rely on them, etc., etc. But this is also, so you see that he injected the midvar sheker tirchak here into the discussion, and he wants to say that, no, but everyone's a lie. This is also not so pashut. First of all, I found a newer study. There's always another study that says something else. This one's from October, the recent, most cutting edge in the field. It says over there that all the old studies are wrong. Not true, people are not lying multiple times a day. Some people don't. There's a minority that are pathological liars, and they're lying many, many times a day. 15 times a day. This leads us to another question, which is, how often do studies lie? That's its own... Also, so that's first of all, is it so pasha that people lie? Second of all, also L'chayri is injecting new Yesodis, outside Yesodis, into the Shakna V'Tarya. He didn't bring a good raya, L'chayri, that everyone's B'cheska Shakran. He brought about the Milsa Dovid L'Gluye. If you look it up in B'chayris, the context is that the Kohen can say that, no, I got this B'chayr with the mum already. And the Gemara says later, a few lines later, Kiv and Dechshidi, because Kohanim are nechshar on doing that they make the mum deliberately, and then they lie about it. So that's why you need the Milsa Dovid L'Gluye to come and say, in this case, it's going to keep him from lying, from doing it and lying. So if I carry it, the context is that Chshudim lie. Taka later on in that Gemara talks about even those who are nechshad on ma'acholim. Do we still trust them that they got it from a kosher place, and that's brought halacha and shogunate and sif yutes? So we see that in the original context. It's also only a counterweight against someone who already is a chashud, which is with the assumption being that once you're chashud, then you lie. That's the question. That's the thing we don't understand here. That's the thing we're trying to understand. But even in this sugya, it's people that are chashud will be put off when they face the risk of being exposed.
You're saying all kind of chashud.
Yeah. From Be'amei Aretz, Chazal can create a class of people and say that they're chashudim if they want. But we don't see, I don't see in this sugya p'sah makar that there's p'sah cheska shakar and b'chlal. So we're back to the original question. If they're nechshud in the Yisr, why are we automatically accusing them of lying when, where did the lying come from? And Mela, when it comes to money, fine, we don't have time to, we can be falpal and shakal batari more and philosophize about the nature of lying, and probably connects to many other sugyas and noisim and namonos and mominus. But when it comes to be moitzi mechaveda, is ein zach. But here we're just talking about stam. Could be bestam. If it's not moitzi mechaveda, if anyone knows, tell me. But where do you see in halacha that when it comes to neutral, random things, that a person has a cheska shakram? Also notice that Siv Zayin, the Mechaber says, so even this guy who we consider a liar, but it's b'shal achedim, we don't consider him a liar. Why would he lie about random things? So we don't just assume that people are lying left and right. Another interesting halacha that might be relevant to this is if you look in Siman Kuf Chav Zayin, the Ramah says, Kol ha'psulei edus kshedim le'inyan yisurim. So you're already a low life, you're already pasul edus, so formal edus and a base thing you're pasul for, but le'inyan yisurim you still have namanos. How does that work in terms of trustworthiness? How is this trustworthiness working? So before we get to the answer, I want to mention another kasha. Found the sefer Shiur Yeridea, Rav and Beitari Lit, Ravram Breuer, Giv Shiurim. So in Chelik Beis, from Tafshinai Tes, he has a simon there on Kuf Tes, and his question there is, you have in Simon Kuf Tes, and the Ramah says the market is from Tamai, that the Amar is not neman on his meiser, and because he's chashuv that he eats sheinimos, or he's chashuv to sell it, so therefore, you take anything from Amar, you have to be maser. So fragt ich verstehe nicht, isn't Tamai its own unique gzeira? Researched, he saw there are Miktsasam Asirin, Miktsasam Minim Asirin. He told them that the Viras Truma, Amad Vehiskin, Halakayach Peres Memaretz, you have to be mafresh again. You see from the whole sugya that it's a special zera. Ramaretz Asirin, still was there. This is the Taisvus and Yavamas that said that this is even more, even a mayor who's Chayish Lamiyuta wouldn't be Chayish for meal. This is Gezeir of the Maya, more extreme meal than the Chayish Lamiyuta. So we see that in Bechlau we see the Maya special din that you can't believe a guy who was never personally accused of anything, no one was ever chayshud this guy personally anything, but if he's in the class of Amei Aretz, not in the class of Chaverim, you don't believe him. Whatever the other things that the Amei Aretz are, maybe he doesn't send his children to learn Torah, whatever it is. Gemara Saita. So mitzad dinei chashud, if we just apply dinei chashud b'davar echad, nema b'davar acher. Here, the guy is doing some other aveda that puts him into the class of Aretz. For that reason, I'm accusing him of not being ma'aser. You need chavras, you need to become a chaver in order to take yourself out of that class. So, why compare chashud to Dmai, he asks. Later, you have, the Beis Yosef brings from Bechayris, and Bechayris you also have a Chosh Del HaMaiser and a Chosh Del HaShviyas. Why is the Beis Yosef had another marker? He could have come from Bechayris, and the Bir HaGra on Sivav is talking straight to Bechayris and not to Dmai. So why is the Beis Yosef being Mitzayin to Dmai over here? And that's how he ends that shir. Agavurcha, for talking about Am Haaretz and Tamai, L'hoyer, that L'chayr we have a problem today. If it's true that everyone's an Am Haaretz until they become a Chaver. So what happens now in Eretz Yisrael? You go to someone's house, anything. The guy tells you it's Musar. Oh, he's an Am Haaretz. Everyone's an Am Haaretz. How do we deal with the problem nowadays? So I found an interesting sefer from 2 years ago. Ginas Reuven, Sefer HaChaver V'Ho'ereach. A whole sefer basically on this topic. His name is Reuven Schwartz. More well-known sefer you may have seen. Eimek HaSufganin, a whole sefer on Chanukah donuts and halacha. But even that one's very halachic, possible. All the sugyas of donut. So here he has a sefer on this sugya. So without getting into the details of the question, he has a separate discussion there as to Shulchan Aruch's acknowledging or not acknowledging of at the Bein Din of not here. But I just want to quote something that he mentions in Chelik Aleph, Anaf Yud Zayin, about the Griz, the Velvel Brisk. What did he do about this Shaila? Right? Because the Yeshiva Welt says that the Griz, the Velvel gehalten, that no, the Rambam, it's the halacha that there's no nemanas on Meisus b'yameinu. So he says that in the book Arovs van August Lebes Brisk Dalet quotes there from Dovid Heller of Lana Scheitz. Who's Dovid Heller of Ghana? It's the father of none other than Rabbi Heller that we all know. And just like Rabbi Heller is very makuriv to Dovid Soloveitchik, who passed away recently, so that was Behemshach, the fact that his father, Dovid, was very makuriv to the Revelvel B'Shaitoi. Revelvel would come to Switzerland, he would stay with him. And in Uvdis van Hagas, he quotes him a lot like a Choshev Makar. He passed away in Tafshanayin, Reb Dovid Heller. So he says, Reb Dovid told the author as follows, that he once went into the Revelvel Friday night after the Sukkah, was to me and said, no, you want to say L'chaim? I brought wine with us from Eretz Yisrael. He gave me L'chaim. He's about to drink. And Revelvel says, why do you ask if it's Moser? So I said, what do you mean? Revelvel said, what? Steht doch in Rambam, that Torah Chadam Lekabel Chavros B'nei Shloisha. Aber so, ja, aber den Amayt, so you ask me if it's Moser. Fine. Revelvel, is it Moser? Yeah. Okay. Drink it. Fine. Afterwards, someone asked, was it das geholfen? How did it help if you asked? Now, the name, ask him. Sure that the famous Mishnah and Yerushalmi, the Am Haaretz ain't Meshaker b'Shabbos. This is the context, that you can trust in Am Haaretz on Shabbos. That's Ad Kan L'Shoinei in that story. So, it sounds like Revelvel Taka held is a problem. But then in one of the others from nowadays, they said, what do you mean? Am Haaretz is only Neman if you buy it from him before Shabbos, you ask him on Shabbos. But if you buy it from him, if you get it from on Shabbos, half this garnet. That's one problem. The writer of this Van August says he got a letter from Heller. Tafshin on Tess, he wrote to him that just recently I was in Yerushalayim and I spoke to one of the other sons of Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he said, could be the Shabbos thing is true, but there's a better reason. Am Haaretz is Choshed Al HaMaisus, he's not Neman, he's a Choshed place to Dover except on Shabbos. But that's someone Am Haaretz who's talking not medactic. But if you have an Am Haaretz who is medactic, so he does have and that means that we don't assume he's master. You have to ask him to make sure that he was master, because it could be his meitzim but because he's not a chashud, so that once you ask him, you could rely on him. If that stimms with the Rambam. Stam, interesting to mention. And we see that Mr. Meir Soloveitchik himself wants to be mechalek between the special of Tamai and regular chashud. And maybe he could be a regular chashud. We can use the regular halachas of chashud. So the second that I'm not chashud him, I can leave him. But maybe it's chazik the little bit as to how did we get from kufya test to Tamai, from Tamai to kufya test. No chashvay is the over the Ramans of bases over the Yovel and Mikri chashud. The tasks are the can't figure out what's going on here. The same thing. It isn't a chashud over to Yavin. I would be ma'irich more, but I don't have the time. But the Shver Zach can't figure it out. The Shach says no. Chashud is only when he's over the hachas. What? How does that make sense? After all that, let's hope that the teretz is a good teretz. So if you look in Sif Aleph, so Sif Aleph is the Torah. Neither of them actually mention anything about what if he had that it's fine. The assumption was, Chlalos doesn't say in Shulchan Aruch that if he says it is fine, it doesn't say that if he says it's not fine. If you look in the Beis Yosef, the Beis Yosef Taka addresses this. He quotes, it's all quoting, Ein Lisma, Zeh Pashat Bekam Mishnayis Mesechus D'mai, Shein HaMa'aretz Naman Al HaMaiseres. Then the Beis Yosef takes about Flu Oim Zum Usar, Zum Usar Ein Naman. So in a certain sense, it's almost like he also read the sentence quote for, could be also read it the way I read it. That when you say Stam, endless all of that could be used B'Sama, you didn't ask him. But from Tzulak, what if he says, he's also not Naman? Why? Because it's Naman, but it is, it's got all of the Yes Naman, so he has to take Meister from everything that he buys and he sells. You have to Meister all the time, and you can't buy other Amaretz. Yehuda Yemer, Af Mesarech, it's Al Amaretz Naman, Amalei Al Atzmei Naman, Ketzit Yei Naman, Al Shalachedem. And Beis Yosef goes on and touches Ois. Although, without ever getting back to the words, Oimer Zumul Usr. To say as follows. That the key here is this, the phrase, Al Atzmei Einei Naman. You look in the Mishnah there to see how they explain it in different ways. Al Atzmei Einei Naman, everything else is mistaif. Namanas, the word namanas, is always used in the context of trustworthiness, how much we trust and believe and rely on what a person says. And we're saying here regarding the person, Al Atzmei Einei Naman. What's Pshat Al Atzmei Einei Naman? So, Kabbalah that what are Chazal talking? What kind of mitzvahs are Chazal talking about? Chazal are talking about Yiddish Kehillah. Everyone knows that you're supposed to keep the mitzvahs, but we don't know, or we know that not everyone is Oimid bin Asayan and keeps everything properly. But because there's certain pressure, well, everyone has a sense of right and wrong, and Yiddish Kehillah, right and wrong is L'fi HaTorah. Even someone who's not makbid on certain dinim and kashrus, he's never going to get up and announce to everybody, but Abim, by the way, I'm not makbid. No, it's a muskal addition that if you would ask him, of course he would say everything is for you. You eat, everything's muskal, everything's muskal. And that's inside the whole din on Maretz by T'mai. If you were able to ask him what's the truth, and he would tell you yes or no, then I wouldn't need the din. This whole din of T'mai, the whole din of Amaretz. Ask him and listen. If he says yeah, no. The whole idea is that they have to live a lie. They have to, when you ask them, they have to tell you, no, of course it's fine. So if they're already lying al atzmam, and they have to tell that it's fine, so when it comes to feeding someone else, also that asking won't help anything. Because they always say everything is moser. So how is this answer going to be different than that answer? Well, you're gonna wink at them and say, is this like your regular Moser or like real Moser? They're not gonna take kindly to that. They have to keep up the appearance. So that's the Pshat Al Atzmei Einei Naman. He has to lie about himself. So Ketzid Yei Naman Al Shalachedem. The whole foundation here is missing. The famous Mishnah about the Sheker and Perek Daled, about Shabbos. Also, there you see clearly that that's where the Mishnah comes the closest to acknowledging that, he's Mishaker, except when he's not. And the Rambam in Hilchos Meiser, Reish Perek Das, it's already clear. He says, the Rambam comes and makes it clear that the whole part is that obviously we can't ask them. So back to the 4 points that we raised. So number one, we can save ourselves from the pulpulim of Lefnei Iver, Midvar Sheker. It's not a davar noisef. He's over and cautious. How do we know? No, the Chashad is based on Sheker. It comes together with Sheker. And maybe we can answer the kasha why. This Rabbi Breuer asked why is the Beis Yosef being mitzayin to D'mai? Because Taka, when it comes to the details, there are big differences in D'mai, because Chazal took it further, made a whole Isra and all the Amei. But the Yisoid, Al Atzmei Einei Naman, the we find Dafka and D'mai, as far as I could tell, it's not mentioned in the Sugyas and Bechayres, etc. In D'mai, then they went and added another Gzein on top of that and expanded it. But the Yisoid is here. And maybe we could even find for the Din Mummer and the Ramah. The whole Din of the Mummer is Fakaret. The Mummer is the only guy who does Averis B'Farasia. He broke out of the pressure of the community, and that's it. He eats nevelas. So there's no sheker. He eats nevelas. There's no sheker involved in that. So maybe dafka someone who is over before Asya didn't lose his namanos. Masha'ekin a chashud. What does a chashud mean? A chashud by definition is, I'm not sure. There's no documentation. For whatever reason, I have the impression that this guy will be over. If he's going to be over, that means he's lying. So he always remains a chashud. That's why he's not naman. And back to the original question, can we say, what about people that were completely fry outside of the community? So on the one hand, we can say that maybe they're worse than a mumma l'tiyovin, because a mumma l'tiyovin came from our community, so he understands the importance of frumkeit. He has a yetzer hara, but maybe he cares about other people. Mashenkin, someone who grew up without Yiddishkeit, so most of them probably think that Yiddishkeit is nonsense. Chas v'shalom. So they're not going to be sensitive. You'll tell them and they'll just laugh at you in their head, and that's the type of scenario we'd be more concerned about. But if, let's say they were in a situation, and if they were in a situation where suddenly they got stuck in a frum environment, and people were pressuring them, are you eating kosher, they would probably lie, because the taka don't see the importance. So they would lie to others also. But if you have the reason to assume that no, they respect those who are makbid, like the examples I gave of other things, sugar-free, etc. So maybe there's an art to Sgan that they could have namanos. It wouldn't be a stira to what we learned here. So we don't have time, but I'll just say in 30 seconds or less that a few months ago, Tzvi Reisman, who writes on halachic topics, printed an article in Hamayon. It's an Israeli Torah publication, Namanos Chiloini V'goy B'yonei Kashrus, and he's malakit that Rav Moshe Taka came along. Back in Russia, we had from parents and not from children, and the parents ate from the children, and what are you going to do? So Rav Moshe was mechadish that there's a musig of Kimle B'gavei. I know you, and I know that you're trustworthy. And he brings Chivas Van Haggis. Moshe Sternbach Taka talks about the question you mentioned with the Baal Tshuva where the wife is not. Can we take this Yisoid of Moshe and say that the Baal Tshuva says, Kim Levigaveh, it's my wife, I know, I can trust her. And he's almost about to accept it. He doesn't go, all the way. He doesn't want to say about dos. And there's more discussion of that. Moshe Weiss, there's a discussion about this in current Paiskim, so maybe we can connect that discussion to this idea. Good Shabbos.